Imagine this for a second. You've been talking to a woman. Maybe things were flowing. Maybe you weren't even that deep into it yet. But there was a rhythm. A couple of calls here, a couple of texts there, and she got used to hearing from you. Then, suddenly, you stop. No good morning message, no random call in the evening, no little check-ins that she's come to expect. What happens in that moment? Well, the first thing is confusion. She's going to start wondering, wait, did something change? Did I miss something? Now, here's what's fascinating. Women are thinkers. They don't just experience something and move on. They process it. So when you stop calling and texting, her brain goes into detective mode. She might replay your last conversation. She might remember that joke she told and wonder if you didn't like it. She might ask herself if she was too quiet, too open, too much, or not enough. And this isn't because she's insecure. It's because she's invested. She cares enough to look back and try to make sense of your silence. And what makes this stage so powerful is that it sets the tone for everything that happens next. That initial confusion is her way of trying to re-establish the rules of the game. Up until now, you've taught her what to expect from you. You've been consistent. The moment you stop, she has to recalibrate. Is this a new pattern? Is this temporary? Is he busy? Or is this his way of backing off? Now let's be clear. This is not the part where she falls out of love or loses interest. Quite the opposite. In many cases, that silence pulls her in closer because humans crave certainty. The moment she feels it slip away, her mind wants to chase it to close the gap. That's why in those first few days, you may notice her curiosity kick in. She might open up your social media just to see if you're active. She might linger on the thought of you more than usual. You not being there creates space for her imagination, and often imagination is more powerful than reality. But let's also look at it from her perspective. You stopping communication doesn't just create mystery. It creates questions about your intentions. Is this a deliberate move? Did you get bored? Are you playing games? And women, more than anyone, are sensitive to emotional shifts. If you'd been attentive and suddenly pull away without explanation, she's going to notice. And that's when the confusion starts to turn into curiosity. Think about the last time you lost touch with someone you were excited about. What did your mind do? You didn't just shrug. You thought, maybe they're busy. Maybe something happened. Maybe they'll reach out tomorrow. And as the hours turn into days, that curiosity grows legs. It walks around with you all day. That's exactly what she's experiencing. And here's the thing most men miss: that first stage is not about her being angry. It's about her being thrown off balance. And balance matters. Because the more balanced she feels in your dynamic, the more secure she feels about you. The moment that's disrupted, she starts to pay more attention to what you're really about. If your silence is just a blip, she'll chalk it up to life happening. But if it lingers, it sets off a chain reaction that leads her to deeper conclusions. Now, why is this important? Because you need to know what story is being written in her head when you go quiet. If you don't understand that, you might think silence only creates intrigue. But silence can also create doubt. Confusion is a double-edged sword. On one side, it can make her lean in, wondering what you're up to. On the other, it can make her start questioning if you're someone she can actually count on. And this is where timing becomes everything. A little bit of distance, a little pause, can sometimes make her miss you, can make her realize she enjoyed the attention. But if it stretches on too long, that confusion begins to harden into a belief. Maybe he's just not that serious. So, when you stop calling and texting, the very first thing she feels is not anger, not indifference, but confusion. She's trying to make sense of the sudden change in energy, and how she interprets that moment will decide whether she moves closer to you or starts quietly stepping away. That's why this first reaction matters so much. It's the spark that ignites everything else that follows. So, let's say she's gone through that first wave of confusion. She's asked herself the questions, replayed the conversations in her mind, tried to figure out whether something shifted. After that comes the next stage. And this one is interesting because she starts to test your silence. And here's what I mean by that: women don't just sit around passively waiting for answers. They'll lean in small ways, to see what's really going on. You might notice it in something as simple as a short message. She'll send a quick, "Hey, how are you?" Or maybe a light-hearted meme, nothing too heavy, but enough to open the door. That's not an accident. That's a test. She wants to see if you're going to pick it up. She wants to know, did he really just disappear, or is he still interested but distracted? Now, what's fascinating is that these little nudges are rarely about the surface content. It's not really about the meme she sent or the random question she asked. It's about the subtext. Do I still matter enough for you to respond? That's the hidden question. And if you think about it, that's exactly what we all do when we feel someone pulling away. We create a small, low-risk moment to test whether the door is still open. And here's the part most men overlook: she's not doing this to chase you. She's doing it to gather data. Women are incredibly intuitive, but they also like confirmation. If you've gone silent, she doesn't want to assume the worst right away. She wants to be sure. So those little pings are her way of checking the temperature. If you respond warmly, she'll think, okay, maybe she's been busy. If you stay cold or don't reply at all, the test has given her clarity, and clarity always drives her next move. But here's where it gets even more layered. Sometimes, instead of reaching out directly, she tests your silence by holding hers. She'll mirror you. You stop texting, she stops too. You don't call, she won't either. And what she's really doing in that moment is giving you the rope. Either you use it to climb back toward her, or you hang yourself with it. That's how powerful these tests can be. Think about it. If you've been the one driving the communication, she knows what your consistency looks like. When you take that away, she wants to know if you'll notice the gap she's left by not filling it. Will you come back? Or will you let the silence win? That's the hidden game being played beneath the surface. And make no mistake, these are not manipulative games. They're instinctive. They come from a place of self-protection. She doesn't want to pour her energy into someone who's already halfway out the door. So, before she invests more, she runs these tests, subtle as they may be, to see if her effort is matched. Sometimes the tests are even less direct. She might watch your Instagram story just to see if you notice. She might like one of your posts, not because she's obsessed with your content, but because it's a little flare she's sending up into the sky. It says, "Hey, I'm still here. Do you see me?" And how you respond to that, or don't, tells her everything she needs to know. What's even more interesting is that during this stage, her emotions are in flux. On one hand, she misses the attention. On the other hand, she doesn't want to look desperate, so she's careful with these signals. She keeps them light, subtle, deniable. That way, if you don't respond, she can shrug it off as nothing. But don't mistake that casual surface for a lack of care. The very fact that she's sending them means she's still invested. And here's the bigger picture. This is the crossroads moment. When she tests your silence, she's not just checking if you'll respond. She's evaluating the dynamic. She's asking herself, am I chasing him? Or is he showing up for me? And how she answers that will determine the path forward. If your silence was intentional, to create space, to reset the pace, to stop being taken for granted, then how you handle her tests becomes crucial. If you ignore them completely, you risk sending the message that you're not interested at all. But if you come back in a way that's aligned with your standards, you re-establish balance. You show that you're not chasing, but you're also not disappearing. So, when you stop calling and texting, don't be surprised if she tests the silence. Whether it's a small message, a mirrored pause, or a subtle signal, she's looking for clarity. And the way you respond in that moment doesn't just answer her question. It shapes the entire future of the connection. After she's gone through that first wave of confusion, after she's tested the silence with little nudges or by mirroring you, something deeper begins to happen. Her emotional investment starts to shift. And this is where the silence really begins to carry weight, because it doesn't just affect her behavior. It affects how she feels about you, about herself in relation to you, and about the relationship as a whole. Here's the thing about consistency: it builds security. When someone shows up for us regularly, we naturally start to relax into that rhythm. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to question it. It becomes part of the emotional backdrop of our lives. When you call, when you text, when you show up consistently, you create a sense of certainty. But the moment that pattern changes, that certainty starts to unravel. And when certainty unravels, emotions begin to shift with it. At first, she may feel a heightened attachment. Your silence can create a pull, like an absence that suddenly makes you more present in her mind than ever before. It's that classic scenario where you don't think about how much you miss someone until they're gone. In those early days of your silence, her mind may wander back to you more often, imagining what you're doing, wondering if you're thinking of her, and sometimes even romanticizing you more than she did when you were actually present. That's the strange paradox of silence. It can make someone think of you even more. But if the silence continues, the emotional pendulum starts to swing in the other direction. That heightened attachment eventually gives way to self-protection. She begins to think, why am I putting this much energy into someone who isn't putting energy into me? And once she starts to ask herself that question seriously, she begins to detach. That's when the emotional investment shifts from longing for you to guarding herself from you. And that shift is powerful, because once she starts to pull her emotions back, it's not always easy to get them again. Women, or when they're invested, can give an incredible amount of energy, care, and attention. But once they feel their efforts aren't being reciprocated, that same energy can be redirected elsewhere. She might start pouring it into her work, into her friendships, into her personal growth. She may even start paying attention to other people who are offering her the consistency you've stopped giving. Now, here's where a lot of men get blindsided. They think, well, if she was so into me, she'll wait around. But what they forget is that investment is a two-way street. Silence doesn't just test her patience. It forces her to reevaluate her role in the connection. She's asking herself, am I investing in someone who is equally invested in me, or am I pouring into a bucket with a hole in it? And if it feels like the latter, she will start to pull her emotions back, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. You can almost think of it like a scale. In the beginning, the weight of her emotions is leaning heavily toward you. She's thinking of you, she's excited about you, she's engaged. But every day that passes without reciprocity, that scale tips back toward balance. Eventually, it may tip so far in the other direction that she feels lighter without the weight of you on her mind. That's the danger of silence. It can shift her from craving you to moving on from you. But it's not all negative. Sometimes this emotional shift is exactly what's needed, because if she was starting to take your presence for granted, your absence makes her revalue it. When the texts stop, she realizes how much they meant. When the calls don't come, she feels the gap they filled. And in that space, her emotions can deepen because now she recognizes what life feels like without you in it. Silence, in that sense, can make her appreciate you more if the foundation between you is strong enough. What decides whether she grows fonder of you in your absence or starts to detach from you is the story she tells herself about your silence. If she believes you're genuinely busy, grounded, and living your life with purpose, she may feel admiration and curiosity. But if she believes you've lost interest or that you're playing games, her emotional investment will start to fade. So, when you stop calling and texting, understand that her emotions won't stay in the same place. They will shift. At first, she may think of you more, but over time, she may feel the need to protect herself by thinking of you less. And in that delicate transition, the entire direction of the relationship is decided. That's why silence is never neutral. It always changes the emotional landscape. When the silence has stretched long enough, when the confusion has settled and the tests have been sent out with mixed or no results, and when her emotional investment has already started to shift, this is where the real turning point happens. She begins to redirect her energy, and this redirection can go in two very different ways. On one hand, she might turn inward, or when your voice and your messages no longer fill the spaces of her day, she begins to fill them herself. Maybe she takes that extra time to dive deeper into her work. Maybe she throws herself into a fitness routine, or maybe she reconnects with passions and hobbies she had put on the shelf while you were taking up more of her emotional space. Suddenly, that hour she used to spend replaying your texts or waiting for your call becomes an hour spent on herself. And there's something empowering about that. In fact, this is often where women rediscover just how self-sufficient they are. You see, attention is addictive. When you provide it consistently, it can feel like an emotional high. When it's taken away, there's a withdrawal. But like any withdrawal, once she gets through the discomfort of it, she realizes she can function just fine without the substance. She realizes that she was whole before you, and she can be whole after you. That can be an incredibly liberating shift for her, and it often becomes the moment she starts investing more heavily in her own growth and happiness. On the other hand, she may turn outward. If she feels neglected, if she feels like she's giving her energy to someone who isn't giving it back, she may begin to seek fulfillment elsewhere. And this doesn't necessarily mean she's going to immediately look for another relationship, though sometimes that does happen. More often, it looks like leaning harder on her friends, spending more time in social circles, or entertaining new conversations that make her feel valued again. Because here's the truth: people want to feel seen, or they want to feel like important, and they want to feel like they matter. When you stop calling and texting, she's still going to have that need, and if you're not filling it, she will naturally be drawn to the places where she can. Now, what's crucial here is that this shift in focus isn't about revenge, and it's not always even about you. It's about her self-preservation. It's about making sure she doesn't lose herself in the disappointment of your absence. Women are often very good at correcting emotionally. They might give you a window of time to step back in, but once that window closes, the energy they were directing toward you gets rerouted. And once that rerouting happens, it's much harder to win back. And this is where so many men make the mistake of thinking, she's probably still waiting. She'll still pick up when I call. But what they don't see is that, in their absence, she's been rediscovering her independence. She's been reminding herself that her life doesn't revolve around waiting for messages that never come. And by the time you think to reach back out, she's often already shifted into a mindset of, do I even want this anymore? The beauty of this stage, though, is that it's not always negative. Sometimes your silence, whether intentional or not, ends up being the very thing that pushes her to grow. It forces her to stop leaning on you for validation, and instead, she leans on herself. She learns that she doesn't need a constant stream of texts to feel valuable, and she begins to reclaim parts of her life that maybe she'd let slip. And in a strange way, that can make her even more attractive, because she's radiating that self-sufficiency and strength that comes from pouring into herself again. But don't mistake her strength for indifference. Just because she has redirected her energy doesn't mean she never cared. It means she cared enough to notice the absence, but she respects herself enough not to sit in the emptiness. And that is the defining feature of this stage: self-respect. When you stop giving her your time and attention, she'll eventually stop waiting for it, and she'll turn her focus toward the places where her energy is honored. So when you stop calling and texting, understand that the silence doesn't just leave her sitting still. It propels her forward, either inward into her own growth or outward into other connections. And once that redirection happens, the version of her you knew before your silence will no longer be the same. By the time she reaches this point, she's no longer just reacting to your silence. She's interpreting it. She's building a story around what it means, and that story becomes the foundation for how she now sees you. This is where reevaluation comes in, and it's one of the most crucial shifts you need to understand, because the way she reassesses you during this phase can either make her see you with a deeper sense of respect, or it can make her question whether you were ever worth her time in the first place. When someone you're interested in suddenly stops communicating, you don't just think about the silence itself, you think about the kind of person who creates that silence. You ask yourself, what does this say about them? And women, in particular, are very good at drawing conclusions from patterns. If you were attentive, engaged, and present before, but now you've pulled back without explanation, she's not just feeling the gap, she's analyzing it. She's asking herself, is this who he really is? Is this a glimpse into how reliable he'll be down the line? And here's the subtle but powerful truth. People don't only judge us by our best moments, they judge us by what we do when things get quiet, when there's no obvious reward for showing up. Your silence becomes a message in itself. Even if you didn't intend it to, even if you were just busy or trying to create space or lost in your own world, she's going to make meaning out of it. And that meaning is what sticks. Sometimes that meaning works in your favor. If she believes you're the kind of man who has his own life, his own priorities, his own goals, she might see your silence as a reflection of strength. She might respect the fact that you're not glued to your phone, that you're not desperate for constant validation, that you don't need to chase. In that scenario, the revaluation builds attraction because she sees you as someone grounded and independent. But there's a fine line, because if your silence comes across not as independence, but as indifference, she'll read it very differently. Instead of thinking, he's secure, she'll think, he's careless. Instead of admiring your ability to focus on your life, she'll feel you don't value hers. That's how easily the narrative can shift. The same action, silence, can tell two very different stories depending on how it's delivered and the context you've created before it. And women don't just stop at evaluating your actions. They reevaluate the relationship as a whole. She'll ask herself, do I feel good here? Do I feel safe here? Do I feel like I can trust this? And the answers to those questions matter more than the initial spark of attraction. Because attraction might be what starts things, but evaluation is what decides whether she stays. This is why consistency is so underrated. A lot of men think they need to impress with grand gestures, with charm, with big moments. But what often matters most to her is, can I rely on him when nothing special is happening? When the excitement dies down, is he still there? Your silence, if it lingers too long or comes too suddenly, makes her question that. And once she starts doubting your reliability, her feelings will begin to shift accordingly. But it's not only about reliability. It's also about maturity. She might start asking, is this how he handles things when he's not interested? By going quiet. Is this how he deals with conflict? By disappearing. Is this how he communicates? In other words, she's not just evaluating the situation, she's evaluating your character. And once her perception of your character changes, it's very hard to reverse. The reevaluation stage is a mirror moment. She looks at your silence and holds it up against everything she wants in a partner. And the truth is, sometimes she realizes that your silence reveals incompatibility. Maybe she sees that your communication style doesn't match hers. Maybe she realizes that you're not as serious as she thought. Maybe she even recognizes patterns she's seen before, patterns she promised herself she wouldn't repeat. And if that's the case, your silence doesn't just push her away in the moment. It can close the door completely. Of course, well, the other possibility is that your silence confirms something positive. It may confirm for her that you're not clingy, that you don't need constant reassurance, that you have the confidence to let her come to you. If she already respected you and already valued the connection, she may actually lean in more, feeling like you're the kind of man who's not easily swayed by emotion or insecurity. So much depends on the story she tells herself about your silence, and that story depends on the foundation you laid before you went quiet. If you built trust, if you built respect, if you built consistency, your silence may strengthen her view of you. But if you didn't, if the foundation was shaky to begin with, then the silence becomes the final piece of evidence she needs to decide it's not worth it. When you stop calling and texting, she doesn't just feel the loss of communication. She reevaluates who you are and whether you fit into her life. At the end of all of this, after the confusion, after the little tests, after her emotions have shifted and she's redirected her energy, after she's reevaluated you and what you mean to her, she arrives at the moment of truth. This is where she makes her final decision. And that decision usually comes down to one of two paths. She either moves on or she re-engages with you. What's important to understand here is that by the time she reaches this point, it's not an impulsive choice. It's not based on a fleeting feeling or a mood she happens to be in. It's the product of everything she's processed up until now. The way you handled your silence, the way she interpreted it, the way she felt about herself during that time, all of it builds up to this crossroads moment. If she decides to move on, it's rarely because she woke up one morning and thought, I don't care anymore. It's because, little by little, she taught herself not to care. She trained her heart to detach. She reminded herself of her worth and started to build a life without your presence in it. And once that process is complete, It's not easy to reverse. By the time she's decided to move forward without you, she's already built new habits, new routines, maybe even new sources of joy and validation that don't involve you at all. For you, it might feel sudden. One day she's there, the next she's not. But for her, it's been a gradual journey of letting go. On the other hand, if she decides to re-engage, it's not because she's weak or because she can't let go. It's because she's decided, after everything, that the connection with you is worth salvaging. She's weighed the confusion, the tests, the disappointment, the silence, and she's still concluded that there's enough there to justify giving it another chance. But notice this, if she re-engages, she's not coming back blindly. She's coming back with a sharper awareness of who you are and how you operate. She's not naive anymore. She's not going to invest in the same way she did before without watching to see if your actions align with what she truly wants. And that's why this final decision carries so much weight. Because whichever direction she chooses, it's not just about how she feels about you. It's about how she feels about herself. If she chooses to move on, it's a statement of self-respect. It's her saying, I deserve more than inconsistency. If she chooses to re-engage, it's also about self-respect, but in a different way. It's her saying, I see value here, but I'm not going to ignore the red flags. I'll give this a chance, but on terms that protect my heart. This stage is also where many men misunderstand women the most. They think silence is just a tactic, something to create intrigue or mystery, something that will automatically pull her closer. But they don't realize that silence isn't neutral. It creates a fork in the road. And if the foundation isn't strong, if the connection isn't built on trust and genuine respect, silence doesn't create attraction. It creates distance. And once she's chosen the path of distance, it's almost impossible to reverse. But if she does choose to re-engage, that doesn't mean you've won. It means she's giving you another chance to show her something real. And what you do with that chance matters more than ever. Because at this stage, she's not blinded by the excitement of the beginning. She's clear-eyed. She knows what it felt like when you disappeared. She knows what it felt like to question herself, to test the silence, to shift her emotions, to redirect her focus. She's lived through all of that. So when she decides to step back in, she's not doing it lightly. She's doing it because she sees potential, but that potential has to be honored. So the final decision, move on or re-engage, isn't really about punishment or reward. It's about alignment. It's about whether her values, her needs, and her vision for what she wants in a relationship line up with the version of you she's come to know. And once she's made that decision, it usually sticks. When you stop calling and texting, the silence eventually brings her to a choice. And that choice becomes the story she carries forward with or without you.